418 and 419. And we want to be transparent about why and how that happened and what we think may be next after we get to this decision. I know some of you have asked, what happens if RTA Next fails? So we're going to talk about that tonight because I know there's some interest there. And I also want to, one of our real goals tonight is to help you all understand LSA's reasons and empower you to use that information yourself, individually. You know, Living Streets Alliance considers this a grassroots, community-driven effort. Living Streets Alliance does not have hundreds and thousands of dollars to send out slick-looking flyers or to buy advertising time on television or to hire pricey consultants. But Living Streets Alliance believes that regular people like you and me can make a difference in the outcome of this upcoming election. So I'll stop right there, and I'll go ahead and introduce the folks who are going to participate in our fireside chat. And I'm going to begin with Vanessa Casio, who is the Executive Director of Living Streets Alliance, and she's also a public health leader, and she has local and national experience in transportation policy. Probably her most important job is she's a mom, and she's also a native Tucsonan, and she was involved with the Safe Routes to Parks program in the National Safe Routes Partnership. But now she is leading Living Streets Alliance. Vanessa holds a master's in public health from the University of Arizona. Thank you for being here, Vanessa. In the middle here is Dr. Arlie Atkins, who is an associate professor of urban planning at the University of Arizona. He holds a PhD from Portland State University and a master's degree in city planning from UC Berkeley. You know, prior to his illustrious academic career, Arlie was a planner for TriMet, the transit agency in Portland, Oregon. So he has that experience he's bringing. And then to top it off, Arlie is the program chair of the Masters in Science in Urban Planning program at the University of Arizona. And I think a couple of his students are here too. All right, Arlie. And the last member of the fireside chat here is Logan Havens. And Logan is also a board member of Living Streets Alliance. He was also appointed by the mayor and council to sit on the City of Tucson Housing Commission. And he is an architectural photographer and designer who is exploring housing, land use, and ecology. His work is really interesting. He was featured in Tucson's accessory dwelling unit model plan library. So he brings that kind of designer eye. And his largest priorities are in the cross-section of green infrastructure, mobility, and housing. That's Logan. So with that, I will let this group begin to share with you some of their thoughts. And we're going to do this kind of informally, so it's not going to be highly structured, moderated panel. But I'm going to turn it over. You want to start, Vanessa?
I do. Is this on? Oh. No. Nope. Oh, there we go. Hi, everybody. And hello, everybody joining us online. We're actually live streaming right now, so I know there's many others who are not here present but are tuning in virtually on our platform. Thank you so much, Albert, for your wonderful introductions. We've been fielding a lot of questions, and I really felt it was important to create this space with you all, and I see a lot of familiar faces and really appreciate you being here with us. So, one of the things that I keep coming across in my interactions at the doctor's office, with my neighbors, I was at my tío's carne asada yesterday, And I keep getting this question of like, okay, what's the big deal about RTA Next? Okay? And I'm in this day to day, and so I'm really curious to hear from Arlie, Logan, like how do you respond to folks, just everyday folks living their life, when you talk about something like RTA Next and the propositions before us?
This microphone? Yeah, maybe that one works better.
Oh, yeah.
All right, great question, and it's a question I've also gotten a lot, and it's something that we've discussed a lot. I think in the community, at the university, and I will say before I fully answer, so I'm here tonight not in my official capacity with the university. I do not speak on behalf of the university. I'm here as a voter and a Tucson resident who happens to be an expert in some of these things that we'll be talking about. But I think the reason this is such a big deal is right there in the fact that it's a 20-year transportation plan. These typically, not just in Tucson, but anywhere that is considering one of these are potentially transformational endeavors. These are lists of projects, these are plans that get to the heart of who we are as a community and who we want to be going forward. So there's long-term things that we need to be considering here, but there's also very real day-to-day impacts on people that will begin very soon. And I think if you look at the last 20 years of transportation investment in Tucson, if you look at our current track record of how we're doing in terms of transportation, there is a lot to be desired. There's a lot to be addressed. And I think that makes this moment even more important in Tucson and in Pima County, because we're trying to make up for lost time. We're trying to make our streets safer. We're trying to make our transit system more supportive of those who need and who choose to use transit. And we're trying to address big challenges related to climate change. And all of those things are at the heart of a transportation package like this.
The question was, what is RTA or RTA
Yeah,
Next?
if you're chatting with your neighbor and somebody who's sort of like maybe on the periphery following this issue.
Yeah, so for me, the best way to understand what RTA was or what RTA Next is going to be, for me, one of the best examples is the streetcar. This is the project from RTA that I saw that really did a lot to shape our community. They put in $75 million. The project was a little over $190 million. It was matched with federal funds. And what that did is it recentered our city. It gave us a transportation option. We have over 5,000 riders per day. We've seen thousands of housing units get put into our city. We've seen affordable housing filling our city all along this route. And now we have a better center than when I first lived here. And then on the opposite side, what we have is things like Downtown Links Grant or Broadway with 3 years of litigation to get the scope reduced, because the original plan was to demolish about 200 tax-generating businesses along that route. And Grant, which did not get the scope reduced, did demolish a lot of structures, and we were left with a lot of liminal space and a road that is not comfortable or safe to walk, bike, or even drive on. And so when I look at RTA as the past, that's what I see, is there's the potential for funding mechanisms, for plans to reshape cities and bring in billions of dollars of investment and bring in a center for a community. And then there are other projects like Downtown Links, where I can no longer walk from my friend's house in Dunbar Spring to downtown, because even when it's finished, there's going to be one narrow crossing, and that has divided our city. So when you look at RTA Next, for me, the caution is we are putting less money into a capital investment transit project, something visionary like the streetcar. We're putting $70 million after all this inflation, 20 years of inflation. We're putting less money into that capital project, and we're putting a lot of money into widening roads in the outskirts of our city. So for me, where we put our money outlines our priorities as a community, and I do not see I see some benefits from the past. I don't see full benefits. We became a much deadlier city, and I have a lot to be cautious about in a future.
One of the things I was reflecting on too, in terms of 20 years time span, LSA started 15 years ago. So that was 5 years into the first RTA plan. So we're sort of in a time now that we've never been in before. And in that time, LSA has engaged literally thousands of people around what they want to see on their streets, for mobility. Families, seniors, workers across neighborhoods have shared a really similar message in that streets must be safe, they have to be predictable, accessible, regardless of whether you're 8 years old or 80 years old. And we've codified that vision in a lot of our plans and our policies as a city. And so for me, when I think about why should I care about this? Because it really does impact our day-to-day and what we need. And to me, casting a vote is about shaping our future. And that's a really that's powerful. That's something that we each have, and that I'm going to be here encouraging you all tonight to really think about who's in your network, who are your neighbors and your friends, who you need to encourage and let them see the power of their vote. And so when I think about it, even just in even more of a stepping back, it's like, no, this is real investment that will shape our city.
And if I could add one more thing, how many of you want to be excited and enthusiastic about our community's 20-year transportation vision? And what I see again and again around these conversations is the people that I find who are supporting quite begrudgingly, saying, this is the best we can do, this is the only plan on the table, we've got to take what we can get, and that's not good enough for a 20-year plan. And I think we need to demand better, and I think there are some good alternatives out there. We'll talk about some of them a little bit later. But I just want to, I've been in Tucson for about 12 or 13 years, probably one of the newer arrivals on this panel at least. I've been in other places that have gone through this process of adopting long-range transportation plans and funding packages. And they're plans that the community can get excited about, that they can see themselves in, they can see a real transformation for the better. And I think that that's just been completely missing from this conversation. And I wish better for our community.
Yeah, one of the things I would like to say right now is as the ballots are out, we right now currently as a city are redesigning First Avenue as one of our corridors, and this is a project funded by RTA. And I've been going to these meetings and I've been having these conversations, and we also as a city just recently passed our Complete Streets policy. When the city surveyed the community to ask what our priorities on First Avenue were, overwhelmingly, it was safety for all road users. Traffic was not even near the top. We're not living in a crisis of commute times. We're living in a crisis of safety. So then what happens is you have this RTA funding mechanism with its demands and its requirements. And those demands and the requirements are a level of service of cars. So when you overlay that over our community request and our community policy of a complete streets, we're obligated to design streets and intersections that we know are unsafe because the level of service requirements that are tied to the funding are going to force us to move a certain level of cars through an intersection. So as a city, our requirements and our requests are secondary to the requirements of that RTA funding mechanism. So while they're saying there's a community advisory counselor that we're building bike lanes, we know when we look at Broadway and Grant that often those bike lanes are just a stripe next to a 45-mile-per-hour, 6 or more lane road that's as wide or wider than I-10. And even in First Avenue, we're looking at crossing distances of over 130 feet often, with slip lanes, with cars not obligated to stop, where we as pedestrians are going to be waiting and hoping that this system is going to change of 100 deaths a year, a death every 3 days. And I just have a hard time seeing how another mechanism that follows that same thing is really going to align with our community values.
I want to jump, it's going to feel like jumping ahead, but I think one of the things that we can talk a little bit more about is like the critiques of the plan. And but I think one of the questions, and thank you all for like who have RSVP'd, who have submitted questions, is the big question that I just want to get at the get-go, because I think that is something, even for LSA, coming out to say no to something is really hard. I don't think any of us want to be in that position. And I think it really is our responsibility to start to articulate and share then what happens? What happens if we vote no and this fails? What is the viable and sort of, like in real terms, what's the pathway? And like have us explore that.
Yeah, it's a really important question. And I think due to the timing of when this is coming on the ballot, there will need to be some very quick action if and when RTA Next is not approved by voters. And I think that there are some short-term things that would need to happen very quickly. I believe conversations are already happening behind closed doors to make sure that temporary sort of bridges are in place while the various entities, including the City of Tucson and Pima County, are trying to figure out what to do next. We've got a little prop here. This is Move Tucson. This is the City of Tucson's transportation plan.
354 pages, in case anybody wants to know.
I have a little bit of professional expert opinion on this. It's a good plan. The city did a really good job putting this together with community support. I don't know how many hours, but hundreds and hundreds of hours of community engagement. It's a balanced plan. And by balanced, I mean it focuses on a multimodal system. It focuses on safety. It focuses on investing in the systems that we already have and making those better before we spend money doing lots of other things. This is the City of Tucson plan, which is important because it's not the region's transportation plan. One of the frustrating things about being able to hold up this document is that we don't have a funding mechanism for Plan Tucson. A fairly small handful of projects in Move Tucson would be moved forward by RTA Next. Not nearly enough. I don't know what the numbers are, somebody may have those, but it's not a very big number. So, what was that?
35 projects.
35 projects out of
236.
236. So I think one of the things that I'm hearing people talk about is a pivot fairly quickly to a City of Tucson half-cent sales tax that would give us additional revenue because Tucson would not be subsidizing suburban jurisdictions. There'd also be less overhead because we wouldn't be paying some of the RTA, I can't remember what they call it in the budget, but sort of an overhead amount that's on top. And I think that is a feasible way to go. That doesn't address everything. It doesn't address the need for some regional investment. So I think at that point, the regional relationship to some degree has been reset. It allows us to go back to the drawing board to figure out what we truly want as a region in terms of transportation investment. Just another prop here. 3 of these pages, by the way, are my notes, but the other pages in this is RTA Next. There's a website that has a little bit more information, but it is primarily a list of projects. It's primarily a list of road building projects. I struggle sometimes even to call it a plan. The way I teach planning, you come up with something like this that starts with coming together with a community vision, identifying goals for meeting that community vision, figuring out which specific strategies will help you get there. I was just teaching this earlier tonight. And that's what gets you a plan that the community can get excited about. And I'm afraid that's not what RTA Next is. So I think we have a plan. I think we don't want to turn our back on the region. I'm the biggest proponent of regional transportation coordination you will find. I've worked in that context in multiple states. That doesn't excuse a bad approach to regional planning. And I think that's what we need to really take a hard look at, continue having the conversations, and reset how we do regional transportation coordination in Pima County.
And I would like to go back to the question we had about who would want to be excited about a transportation plan. What I would like to say is we have, as a city, we have passed almost every proposition that's been put before us except for 414. And one of my favorites right now is Prop 411. I love that proposition. It's repaving every road, every neighborhood road in our city over 10 years. My neighborhood was repaved. Menlo Park, Sam Hughes, we're seeing the whole city repaved. We're getting new, fresh pavement with a half-cent sales tax over 10 years. It also includes safety projects. I can ride my bike through Menlo Park, get onto St. Mary's, ride now a new protected bikeway, cut over and ride right up to Tumamoc on fresh, clean pavement and safe roads. And for me, I look at that and I say, like, that's transformative, positive effect of that's dollars being used that helps everybody with their day-to-day life. I can ride my bike to that Safeway and get in and get groceries also. And when we're looking at that, that's, if we keep the dollars, and RTA ends up putting $250 million into an interchange off somewhere, if we keep those dollars and if we say, let's have small scale, let's configure what we have, let's not expand our infrastructure, let's first off, fix our pavement, because that's one of the big things that we need. And in that process, let's make safety a priority and let's make transportation a priority. Let's make it so when something's happening, we're excited and we're not sad or disappointed to see things happening. So I know I've seen the city of Tucson come together for things like Prop 411 or like our bond measure, the TUSD, our bond measure to do the bicycle boulevards. I love whenever I see a bicycle boulevard going in, and I really do enjoy those safety measures. So I've seen us do visionary things, and this one I agree. I have trouble being excited about a list of road widenings.
So one more thing I do want to mention briefly, because there is a risk, and you probably heard people talk about this, that if we don't come up with a short-term fix, that there could be shortages specifically related to public transit because of the way the original RTA language was written. My understanding is that the gap, something between $10 and $17 million in year one. There are ways that Pima County, Tucson, and RTA can come together to fund that gap. It's not a given that that's going to happen. And one of the things I would love to see more of happening right now is coming up with a contingency plan to make sure that whatever happens on the morning of March 11th, the day after the election, that we have a plan in place to protect some of our most vulnerable transportation users in the city and county. And I think that is possible based on the conversations that I've had. It's a heavy lift, but it is doable. And I think the potential for a short-term shortfall should not be dictating how we make decisions about the next 20 years. And I think with some real leadership on this issue, which I am confident will come to the table immediately after the election, I think we can get that done.
And I keep trying to think of a good analogy for this because it feels like, we're using a 20-year decision to solve an urgency that's right now. And I'm like, we're doing house projects in my home. So it's like, oh, is this like taking out a second mortgage to fix the leaky faucet sort of situation where it's like, no, really let's think about what we're saying yes to and not have this risk looming over our head because there is urgent, I'm not trying to dismiss or diminish, real budgetary concerns, but.
But I think some of that urgency is by design. I think some of that urgency is there to pressure people into voting yes. And I think some of the tactics that we've seen from the folks that are trying to get this passed are not the kind of open dialogue and discourse about our future that would make me feel comfortable in a plan.
So, shifting gears a little bit. So, I think we've said this message enough, but again, I think it's worth reiterating that this isn't just about next year's budget, right? This is a 20-year commitment. And really, once it's in place, it is really hard to shift. And I'm wondering if you all could speak to that, and also even speak to the concern of like, oh, if this fails, will our streets get worse?
I think our streets are very bad. So we're at the bottom is maybe what I'd probably say a little bit. No, I think that we're very fortunate to be at a time where we have a lot of very capable people as mayor and council. And like as a citizen who shows up at probably too many meetings, if this passes, I'm going to be there. And if it's like not going to actually do anything, I'm still going to be there yelling like, we need to stop killing people, even if they don't, if this passes. If it does not pass, if RTA does not pass, then I will be also showing up to the meetings. I will also be calling people, and I will also be sending emails saying like, hey, what support do you need? Who do we need to talk to? How do we figure out what the community actually wants? I think one of the things talking about like creating a plan or what that looks like, the Move Tucson, they spent hundreds of thousands of dollars and hundreds of thousands of hours putting that together. This isn't frivolous. This did engage the community to figure out what the community wants, and it did make a list of projects. And when you do read through that list and start with just tier 1, the highest priority projects, it's really exciting. It does include things like high capacity transit. It does include repaving a lot of our arterials. And if you look at the costs of those projects, some of them are probably outdated with inflation. But if we could start tackling things and improving our city relatively quickly, like the plan is there, it just doesn't have a funding mechanism. So for me, I feel like sad to know that a vote no means it's going to be very hard. We're in a difficult time with a lot of fiscal issues as a city at the moment. And this is just throwing another thing on top of it. But for me, the death every 3 days, or those 3 students dying in that crosswalk right there, or people dying trying to get a car out of a road, or people dying in cars every day, like, it's not worth continuing the system that got us here. Like, we do sometimes have to hard reset to say, we're not gonna be the deadliest city in the country anymore. We're just gonna stop. And it's going to be uncomfortable, and it's gonna be acute pain for some period of months while we get the next thing in place. But if we can get it in correctly, then we can change the trajectory that we're on.
Yeah, I think the pressure to approve something, both at the city level and then an alternate at the county level, most likely, and also to continue coordination with communities like the city of South Tucson. And what gives me hope, despite the condition of things currently, is that if we were to go after a funding mechanism for this plan, that means more money in our community for the things that we need. I think the estimates, and yeah, I was gonna say my human spreadsheet is out there somewhere. As much as $400 million over the next 20 years that will be generated by Tucson taxpayers that will leave the city of Tucson. And again, I'm a huge fan of regional coordination and regional funding for transportation initiatives. But I'm a fan of truly regional projects being funded. And what we see again with this list of projects is local projects, many local projects on the outskirts of our urban region that are largely benefiting developers and communities that are far wealthier than Tucson. If you look at the projects in Oro Valley, if you look at the projects in Marana, I'm not gonna say they don't need these things, but they don't need us to pay for them. These are places with average incomes that are twice what we have in the city of Tucson. To Logan's point, we have some real problems on our streets. Many of you are very aware of this. We're not in a position to be able to have the luxury of sending money to help these wealthier communities pay for transportation projects that frankly should be paid for by developers, because they're going to be primarily supporting new growth, not supporting existing communities. So I have every confidence that there will be some real pressure and I think some real success in coming up with an alternative. And I think that one of the problems that I've seen with RTA in my years here is that I think that communities around our region have been too reliant on RTA, too reliant to fund what really should be local projects like hawk lights or safe street crossings. And we need local control over that. And then let's go back and have the conversation about what we truly need as a region and think about what is the regional transit network that we need? What are the critical road investments that we need to help drive our region's economy forward? But that is not what I see in the current plan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think one of the things that you mentioned, Arlie, about the fact that we are subsidizing projects in jurisdictions that have 2 times the median household income as Tucsonans. And not just that, is that there are projects that were not completed under the RTA 1 that we're asking voters to pay for again. And that to me hits home because, when I think about where my family grew up, 22nd, it's still waiting for improvements. My grandmother didn't drive. She crossed that every single day on foot to get to work. And this is real people's money that we are sending out to jurisdictions that are choosing not to fund their local priorities. I guess the other thing I will say, in thinking about sort of what we have chosen, something that you mentioned already, Logan, in that we have passed Propositions 407, 411, and I think even with 411, I think it was like 75% of Tucson voters approved that measure. And so I'm like, oh yeah, we do want to invest in ourselves. And when I think about I hope everybody goes home and Move Tucson tonight. But one of if you don't want to read, one of the graphics that I really like is the sort of, it was like a little word bubble across the city that shows the values that are reflected in this plan. Regardless of east side, west side, there are real concrete things that people want to see. That is maintenance, mobility choice, things like safety. And so when I think about what we are choosing, what we could potentially choose to invest in, I have a strong belief that we as Tucsonans would choose those things if that were presented to a ballot measure to us.
Yeah, and one of the things that I really value about being in the city of Tucson is that when we have different funding mechanisms, like we have the great giant Brad Lancaster here, who has done so much work with GIS. When we have a GIS funding mechanism within the city of Tucson, it's approached by an equity-based model. We have a tree canopy map. We look at where in the city needs trees, and we put the GIS there. We don't just fund the wealthiest neighborhoods. We're not putting a lot of GIS into Sam Hughes, which already has over 20% tree canopy. We go for an equity-based approach. And what I really value about the city of Tucson, we've done the same with our bicycle boulevards. They cross all of the city through all of the neighborhoods. I'm a photographer. I photograph most of the low-income housing developments, either for the city or for the architects. I've ridden my bike all the way to the Odom Reservation. I've ridden it all the way to Marana to go photograph their city hall, all the way to the east side. I've covered the city on a bicycle, and I get surprised when I see really quality infrastructure on almost every edge of our city. It is not fully connected. Like, sometimes you do have to work through to connect it, and it is never a direct path. We do have really amazing infrastructure that could use more investment. And what I really value about our city is that when we look at things within our city, we say who has the highest need, and we start approaching it from that base. Again, back to Arlie's point, the city has about half the income of the surrounding communities, but the majority of dollars are going to those outside communities. The share that Tucson gets, a majority of the Tucson's share is the transportation funding, because the city of Tucson is the one that has the transit. So when I look at this equity model that the city approaches things with, and then when I look at the regional planning and the safety crisis we have, I just do not see that reflected in us, and it makes it very challenging that way.
I know we've already sort of talked about this, but maybe we can just be a little bit more explicit in terms of, funding that should reflect our values and where the money is actually going to in RTA Next. Because I know some of the talking points I've heard from RTA is like, no, every project has safety, right? No, this is investing in our transit, right? And so I'm wondering if you can kind of share with us how you're thinking about it, or how you've analyzed the plan from that lens of like values and sort of things that you're looking for.
I'm sure there are many home improvement analogies for this. I'm having a hard time coming up with one right now. But I think, and I was having a conversation with someone just last week about this, and they were saying, I am a pedestrian who walks along Broadway, and I appreciate that there are more safe legal crossings for me. And so this was somebody who was trying to decide how they felt about RTA Next. And I said, now imagine if we could fund those safer crossings, if we could fund those improved sidewalks without having to build new lanes, if we could do that without having to tear down buildings that are part of our community, without displacing businesses. So I think that we too often fall into this trick, and I think this is one of the problems from the last 20 years of RTA, the first 20 years, is that we can only have these things if they're attached to a road widening project. And when you think about a Grant Road or a Broadway, or the next plan, the various projects that are gonna widen roads, these are projects that cost $50, $75, $100, $150 million. And yeah, they're gonna build some new sidewalks, they're gonna build some bike lanes and some street crossings. But imagine how much more of our city we could cover with those things that would keep our residents alive if we weren't having to couple those with these overpriced and often unnecessary road widening projects. And I think that's where the math really starts to shift. And we can go from, I think, a point of thinking we're never gonna get there as a community. We're never gonna be able to address our safety problem. We're never gonna be able to have the kind of infrastructure we need. If you start to think about redistributing some of those larger funded projects, that's where we can start to really see change.
Yeah, and one of the I don't know, warnings I would give is that every time you widen a road, say you go from a 2-lane road to a 4-lane road, or a 4-lane road to a 6-lane road, those crossings get larger, and the cost of safely getting people across those crossings gets higher. So we have more expensive infrastructure to move people across these wider roads. So every time we widen a road, that Hawk or Tucson crossing is going to get more expensive. And statistically, the speed of cars when they approach a sidewalk, the faster the car is driving, the less likely they are to stop at a crosswalk. So the wider the roads are, the faster the cars are moving, the less likely cars are going to stop, the more we're going to need more expensive hot crossings, more expensive wildlife corridors, more expensive of everything, and more expensive bicycle infrastructure, just to be able to then, after we've enabled the cars to drive faster and less safe, try to regressively make humans not die at the same rates. So my warning is that if we're putting $150 million into a project, that both the cost of that project now, the cost of maintaining it in the future, and the cost of when 3 pedestrians die, all of a sudden we can instantly figure out how to find those funds to put in 6 hot crossings. How many people are gonna have to die on each of those roads for us to then find money that then takes that limited resource we have to make one crossing when we could address a systematic, system-wide infrastructure change?
And I guess the other thing I would add around safety that I feel is really important when we think about like the human life that we need to think about, right? Like this isn't just about, you know, unsafe streets have real costs. And this adage of like, oh, don't worry, our taxes won't increase with this plan, I think really flies in the face of the human cost that is paid with real lives, real injuries, real strain on our family and emergency services that, you know, this plan doesn't measure those outcomes and talk throughout our region. So we have a few more minutes, and I want to touch on something I think I've been hearing already around like regional collaboration, right, and accountability. And I don't think any of us are going to deny that regional collaboration is important. But, you know, can we talk a little bit more about that and sort of why, you know, what's at stake and why Tucsonans in particular should care?
I guess when I want to talk about, I might not have like the perfect answer to this question, but what I would say is another one of the aspects of Tucson that I really appreciate, one of the best things we have as a city, is the Loop. And that is a Pima County funded network of bicycles that takes you 130 plus miles around the city. And I do think that there are certain infrastructure projects, that's what you would want a regional plan to do, is how do you safely get people all the way across all of the city safely in any mode. And so I think it's more abstract, but like we do need that coordination to make sure that the path doesn't just stop the second you get to Pima unincorporated, or that as soon as you get to the foothills, everything stops. We do want that. We do want some level of collaboration. We do want some level of funding that does get it so that we can safely get from one city to another, that people from Marana can safely access their jobs in the city. However, again, with the RTA, it doesn't do often that cross-border transportation funding.
So I first got involved in conversations about the RTA about 5 years ago. I was asked by the mayor of Tucson to look into and testify to the regional council about the voting structure for RTA and for PAG. And for those of you who don't know, the city of Tucson, which represents about 55, I think, % of the population, gets 1 vote out of 9 on this regional council. So that's the same vote that Oro Valley and Marana get. And I think that leads to some real problems. And I'm, again, huge proponent of regional transportation coordination. PAG, which is our federally mandated metropolitan planning organization, I think that could potentially be appropriate for the way that they distribute federal funding, which is supposed to go to regionally significant projects. When we start turning RTA into a funding mechanism for local projects, that's where we start having real problems with that distribution of voting power. And I think we've seen it have some really bad results for Tucson. And I think that was something that the city of Tucson said at one point, mayor and council, that needed to be fixed before the city would get on board with moving forward with RTA Next. That was not fixed. We still have the 1 vote out of 9. And I think that should give people a lot of pause going forward, because that means that even though they have added in some flexibility, we are ultimately, as a city, not in charge of how those funds are used, policy changes that might come down the road, who a new executive director of PAG and RTA might be, and I think that puts us at a real disadvantage, and that needs to be revisited.
Are we up for time?
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. These guys did a great job. So I want to say this. I've been watching the audience, and you have been really good listeners. Nobody's been on their phone, and nobody's been like talking, so I appreciate that. I know it's not like that in every class, so I appreciate that. But it is time now to give you an opportunity to ask your questions. And I think that's an important part of why we're coming together, because I know y'all have some good questions. So I'm going to ask if you want to ask a question, please state your name. And if you're affiliated with a group or a neighborhood or a business, that would be great. And then share your question, and we'll try to get you some kind of answer. So who wants to go first? There's the first hand, there's the second hand. So if you two would queue up here, we'll go with you. Steve?
Thanks, Albert. And thank you guys for being here. And it's exciting to have this many people interested in transportation funding. That's a fabulous thing. Vanessa, last time I heard you talk, it was at the KUET forum about the RTA. And I was struck when you said that you have a 7-year-old daughter, and 20 years from now, you want her to be able to live in a city that values the right kind of investment, that does its transportation well. And it struck me because exactly 20 years ago, I had a 7-year-old daughter. Her name was Gigi. And if you want to fact check me, you can look at the front page of the Arizona Daily Star in May 2006, and I'm pictured holding her up celebrating the victory of the first RTA. And it was thrilling to me that we were able to get the streetcar in place through that process. And I have to say, without the first RTA, we would not have a streetcar. And to further look at that, just to go back to the previous history, I'm a public artist. I am Steve Farley. I was on the first Citizens Committee to put that in there. It didn't start with that, but we got it through the Citizens Committee when we actually created a whole separate transit subcommittee and made the case to the rest of the Citizens Committee why we needed to increase the transit component and put the streetcar in there. But prior to that, in 2002, I led a group that killed a city road tax that was half-cent sales tax for only roads. Albert remembers that. And we took it down. No transit funding at all. And then we put on the ballot with 15,000 signatures our own initiative called the Light Rail Initiative that had light rail down South 6th, out Broadway to Pantano. We had massive bus improvements, bikeways, sidewalks, and neighborhood street maintenance. It also went down because the people who supported the road tax were against ours, and the only way to go ahead after that defeat, in my belief, was to work together with people we disagreed with. And that was the key of what happened to RTA 1. I worked in that transit committee, and I convinced Steve Christie, of all people, if you know him, he's the very Republican council member. He was a car dealer at the time, so it was even less likely. But I convinced him to make the motion to add the streetcar and increase our funding from $200 million to $532 million for transit in that plan. So it's absolutely crucial that we work with people we disagree with and give away projects we disagree with in order to get the things that create things like the streetcar that have been transformational, as you said.
Yeah.
Do you have a question?
The question
Yes.
is, this plan has $750 million for transit in it. If it doesn't pass, all those things we fought for will be gone. And I love them about Move Tucson plan, but as you all said, there's no funding source. And I can tell you from the blood, sweat, and tears that I put into it, it's not easy to pass a funding source, even in the city of Tucson, because that east side, they're not that different from the other suburbs. So the question is, how are you going to fund an alternative if this goes down, given how much this is going to hurt transit users?
Okay, very good, Steve. Thank you for getting to the question.
So I think Yes, the streetcar was a transformative project, and I do think that that's one of the highlights of the city right now when it comes to transportation. I think when you look at the dollars, it's arguable exactly how much, but the percentage of funding from RTA 1 to RTA Next, it's about 25% and maybe 25 or 26%. We didn't dramatically increase the funding for transit between RTA 1 and RTA Next. And the thing that we lost was a big key visionary transportation movement in this. We have some amount, 70 million, less than was for the streetcar, towards rapid bus, but that's contingent on getting federal funding in this current political climate. So there's no guarantee on that. And then apart from that, we just are maintaining service. So we're not expanding dramatically service. So for me, I feel like, yes, the first RTA did have a visionary quality project that centered the city. This one, in the RTA Next, we lost that, which is part of why a lot of us are disillusioned with the RTA Next, is the RTA Next did not emphasize something the same way.
So two things. So Steve, I don't know if you probably don't remember this, but I met you soon after I moved to Tucson. You were running for something and knocked on my door in the neighborhood. And I remember at that time, there were all these conversations about what was going to be next. Was the streetcar going to go down Campbell? Was it going to go down Broadway? Were we going to get some kind of bus rapid transit expansion? Well, let's do it. That's not in this plan. This plan shortchanges transit users for 20 years. There's no way around that. If you look at what other regions are doing for transit, this is a joke. No. Well,
No.
okay, so yeah, let's talk about Phoenix. So Phoenix so they had to negotiate with the Arizona legislature. They were able to get 37% or 38% for public transit. We have 27% here. They were able to they can't fund light rail due to state law with their equivalent RTA funds, but they are funding 70 miles of bus rapid transit. This plan doesn't even fund 5 miles. There's not funding for a complete 5-mile bus rapid transit line, let alone a bus rapid transit system. So I agree, we don't want to move backwards from this, and I think everybody in this room is very likely committed to fighting their butts off to make sure that we get more transit funding out of whatever comes next. And I agree, we need to be talking to people that we disagree with. We need to be prioritizing these things, finding balance, and I don't think this is it.
I would like to add one more thing about that, because something that you mentioned, Steve, evokes to me about process, and something we haven't talked about is how this plan even came to be, right? And so we had staff and board members who served on the Citizens Advisory Committee for 2 years, 60 meetings. They were disbanded. They never approved this final plan. They had spent hours drafting values that would determine which projects would be included in this plan. There was a process that was broken. And so, to me, what this speaks of is like, no, there wasn't a process. We weren't invited at the table. And this was a plan that was put together behind closed doors because of political expediency.
Okay. Next question. And then you're next.
Hello, thank you guys. I'm Daniel Brockert with Arizona People Mover and No More Road Widenings. I wanted to ask, I want to piggyback on Steve Farley because I want to ask about fiscally conservative ways to make our roads safer, things that might not require building new infrastructure so we don't have to pass a new tax. Things like no right turn on red standard countywide, 10-foot lanes standardized countywide. I think that would just be the cost of repainting the road, right? And then maybe no left turns without a green arrow. Can we talk about things that we could do without building? Yeah.
Great question.
I can answer that one. I have a fun one. So the reason I joined the Living Streets Alliance board was because of Everin, one of our alumni, very important staff. And when COVID happened, and I sent in, I want to close the street for indefinitely. I want to close it for a month. I want to close it, and I sent in permits to the city to just close it for any amount of time. And they're like, "Oh, you're aggressively trying to do this, maybe too aggressively. Let's partner you with Living Streets Alliance." They were looking for a partner to try one of the slow streets, and so we ended up being able to shut down 4th Avenue north of Speedway for over a month. And it was a really great opportunity to reuse our streets. And we had street concerts with space outside, and every weekend we would have music. And when it was coming to an end, Erin talked me through it. She got on a Zoom call and she said, "When this is over, the cheapest thing you can do is paint." And so we, as a neighborhood, this engineers came to us and they said, "Hey, we want to leave some lasting impact here. What would you like?" And I said, "Minimum road widths. And then the leftover space, just stripe it as non-existing space, or stripe it that we can use it for other things." And by engineering that outside of the roadway, that gave us a new space that was no longer road, that we could then, without engineering, add bollards. We could then add art. We could then add planters. And so I think when we're looking at this, it's not, as a city, I think every time we're doing work, we think like, well, let's just future-proof it. PAG is like, we're going to have, RTA is like, we're going to have 40% more cars on this road. PAG is like, we're going to have 10% more cars on this road. We've seen declining traffic on 1st Avenue or most of our roads. So it's like, let's start saying, let's take what we have, let's make it the minimum width that slows cars down, and it gives us space for other things. It gives us space for safety or trees or transportation or transit. So I think a lot of the times it is, reassessing, saying like, let's not widen all of our roads, let's not blow them up to wider than the I-10. Let's deal with the footprint we have and move a lot of people. A lot of countries and cities move a lot more people in a lot less space.
Go ahead, your name and
Thank you,
your
Albert.
question.
My name is Jonathan Salvatierra, and I just came from Amanda Schubert's open house, Ward 6, and I thought I was going to meet her here because this is such an important, base of hope and engagement for her. But fortunately, when I attended an LD20 meeting for January, she was our guest speaker, and she spoke directly to this issue. And I apologize for, making so many hand gestures and wanting to sit on my hands, because she came up with so many smooth, simple answers, because she's been doing research over the last few months and longer over this whole thing. And she brought up the plan, the Tucson or Move Tucson plan, $500,000 on an analysis, and it has great work, great functional ideas, great value engineering, and I have a 3-minute and 47-second clip. Now I just wanted to ask if I could allow the volume, my audio, to present her view.
Jonathan, I'd rather that you ask a question.
And I think it might be difficult. We have people that are live streaming, so if we can,
okay.
yeah.
Or if I can have this dovetail behind the meeting.
If you want to send us a link or a video
Yeah,
clip.
it's a link for her.
Yeah.
That'd be wonderful. Okay, we're all in consensus that everything is about money. So if you have a project like Prop 411, it makes sense, and we've done that on a small scale. The RTA Next, RTA 2006 failed because they underestimated the budget. Then we went through 5 different presidential administrations that ruined everything, and in the recession in 2008, and we were just in the soup. So it's not a good idea to make such a long-term plan, but we should have something that's short-term, mid-range, and long-term. So when we get the opportunity for another Prop 411, that would be a nice short-term. The next step in the process would be to wait for a recession crash that will be an issue that we can deal with, but that's the best time to buy municipal bonds, and we get the lowest interest rate, Okay, so we're making it work to our advantage, even in a recession. And,
You want to ask?
okay.
Yeah.
Something?
Yes, and this comes to the third point that I made before the Board of Supervisors this morning. And that is that if we, as a state, city, and county, take over the entity, Fortis and Tucson Electric Power, that's $1.67 billion a year. Over 20 years, that's easily over $30 billion. What can we do with that when it's reinvested in Tucson? So how likely can we create the emphasis to unite state, city, and county to do something like that, to create a Commonwealth energy utility where our monies are reinvested over and over again instead of just taken out by stockholders?
Okay. Anybody want to take a crack at that?
I think that there are going to be a lot of ways for us to reinvest in ourselves. And I think that whatever happens, pass or not, it's going to take all of us actively working to make either RTA Next the best it can be within the situation, or finding the solutions, the alternatives, and heavily supporting them to make sure it passes. And then also working for all of the power, all of everything that we need to do. We're a city that's in a time of change, and I think we're all gonna have to show up a lot. Thank you.
Okay, so I've got a question over here, the fellow who's standing, and then a question over here from the person who's sitting. You'll go after her.
Thank you. Hi, friends. Rocky Perez. I was formerly a city council member. I was a part of the unanimous group that had signed on in support of RTA because, as RTA goes, the item that we see on the ballot today, I felt was as good as it could have possibly gotten. And in hindsight, I wish I had actually been the outlier in saying no. And I do plan on voting no, personally. I think that what was happening simultaneous to that point was, I think a week after, or maybe actually a week before, was when the 3 U of A students had been fatally hit near campus. It was not even a day later when my own little brother was actually hit by a car and ended up being stuck in a hospital for over a week and is now still months and months later within physical therapy. And so I think that this particular interest is personal, right? So all the things that have been said about safety, I think, are very personal to me in this particular moment. I say all of that in that I know that there are some pretty significant needs having represented Ward 5. I know that we've talked about developments that are happening on the outskirts of Tucson. I do find excitement in that if this were to pass, there are some much needed investments in the south side that I know that we need, right? But like everyone else, I feel that we have an imperative to invest in ourselves first. And so that's why I'm urging people to vote no. I think as we kind of look ahead and we're exploring, I think just overall, I think that, Tucson is going to have to reevaluate the level of participatory governance that it has. As you all look ahead, if it were to fail, what does participatory governance in this particular area look like for you?
Thank you. Thank you for that question. Who wants to go ahead, Arlie?
I'm sure my friends here have comments on this too. And I think one thing we need to be careful of, because there is going to be a lot of time pressure should this fail, is that we don't rush into something that we're going to regret later. So I think that, as someone said earlier, a phased approach where there's a short-term fix for the things that need to happen right away, but that we can take time as a community, and thankfully we do have Move Tucson, as we've referenced. But I think there's an opportunity to go beyond that and have the conversations that you're talking about. One of the things that really excites me is there is a lot of, I think, new energy and new voices like yourself who are paying attention to this. And I think if you look at some of the voices that we have on City Council, in the mayor's office, I'm really excited about what we can do and how they can engage the community to really set us on a much better path.
Mm-hmm.
Again, super fan of Prop 411. I would say that if you go on the project map, you can see, and this is when I look at Move Tucson, and I've thought a lot about this, like how do we structure a different plan if we go a different route? And when you look at Prop 411 and you look on the website, you can see the advisory committee voting in which roads get paved. And it's a very quiet, and it's been a very even process. And I've been watching the grid of map of which neighborhoods get repaved. And I think when we pass something as a city, whatever that might be, or as a region, I would just want to make sure that we don't have a citizen advisory committee that gets disbanded before the plan goes forward. I would want to see something where we actually have a group who you can see them voting, and you can see that, yes, like Drexel does get paved, like Selena's ward, they do have a lot of big needs. And I would, as an equity approach of the city, really hope that that gets a lot of investment, because some of our least safe corridors are in the northwest of the city and in the south of the city. And I would want to see a lot of improvement and safety improvement there. So I would hope that the city would structure in a lot more oversight.
I would just say too, Rocky, in thinking about your earlier remark, I think for years, the city had to advocate, go up to bat at, the table of RTA. And I think this is absolutely not a critique of those efforts. I think we were hemmed in by the structural flaws. And yeah, and that's what we are, it's sort of the remnants of what we're left with is this. And so I'm excited for being the opportunity to hit the reset button.
Okay. Name and affiliation.
Oh, I'm Suzanne Schaefer. I transit advocate. My question has to do with potential funding, and I think maybe specifically for Arlie, but as far as the different jurisdictions. So I hear the potential for Tucson itself. Let's just sort of oversimplify, and let's say that RTA fails, Tucson comes up with a half-cent sales tax. Some of the other smaller jurisdictions also decide to tax themselves, half-cent sales tax to come up with their projects. So we all agree too, though, that there are regional pieces that need to happen, not just the coordination, but the actual, for example, some of the transit, the loop, things like that. So given that I guess we can't have a funding tax for the county that doesn't also tax everybody, in other words, you can't just tax the unincorporated piece, as far as I know, but and maybe you touched on this with your talk about the role of PAG, but how do you see a way to actually fund those regional pieces in this scenario that we're talking about? I can see where Tucson can possibly end up with more funding for what we need, but what are the possibilities?
That's a great question. I think my ideal going forward would be city half-cent sales tax to fund Move Tucson or something like it. And then I'm not opposed to RTA. I'm not opposed to a regional authority to be able to fund some of these things. I think that those can be very effective. I think the questions that I have are process and outcome and track record over the last 20 years. So I would love to see a reset, and I would love to see these conversations continue about what those regional priorities truly are. That's going to take some time. So I think that in the meantime, I think there will need to be city-county coordination with these other jurisdictions.
But that would be another tax on top, right? In other
where
words,
would they get the
does
money?
RTA have any other way to fund besides a sales tax?
RTA doesn't. I mean, PAG is reliant on federal and state kind of pass-through funding.
Presumably it would be a lot smaller.
Correct. Yeah. When I say another RTA, I mean a pared back one that is really focused on regional priorities that jurisdictions aren't using as kind of a local bank for transportation investment.
You wouldn't necessarily need a half cent across the entire region.
Exactly. And I think exactly. Yeah.
So just to your question, Suzanne, I'd add one more thing. The RTA funds are not the only funding source available at the regional level. There are federal funds that come to the region, and there are ADOT funds that come to the region, and One of the challenges is those are all being programmed in RTA Next. So they are not available if RTA Next passes. If RTA Next does not fail, potentially some of those could be used to meet regional needs. So that's a partial answer to your question. Please, name and affiliation.
Hi, my name's Josh. I have no affiliation, which actually gets to my question, which is like, so say, you know, in a month this fails, the vote fails, and what is a thing that like just normal people can do to sort of like light a fire under the city in particular to start working on things? Because like I get the value of a phased approach, but also like the longer everyone's sales tax goes down by 0.5 cent, like the harder it is for them to say like want to put it back up. So anyway, I just wondered like how do you incentivize the city to move quickly, and what could you do as an ordinary person to do that?
I'd be happy to take that one. So the most effective thing as a citizen that you can do, usually it's to talk directly with your council members, or your neighborhood association and your council members. Your neighborhood association, you could get them together to support it, but generally it's council members and the mayor and council. So, and generally if you want to be heard, the highest priority is to show up to city council meetings and speak. Next it is to call your council members, and then after that is to email. Usually when the city looks at statistics, they're looking at the volume. And if they get a bundle of 100 emails, they kind of just clump it into one oftentimes. So the more people that show up and speak and say, hey, we want transit funding to be one of the larger priorities. If a lot of us show up at city council meetings, then that will have to become part of it. And then grassroots organize, like go to your neighborhood and say, hey, I want to work on educating. I want to follow Living Streets Alliance, invite Living Streets Alliance, or the organizations that you care about and you believe in that align with you. Say, like, can you come to my neighborhood association and talk with us? And just, yeah, start to organize. Like, try to get education, because it's really, really hard to get information if you don't have hundreds of millions of dollars to buy billboards. It's really, really hard to get information to every member of the city.
I was gonna say, so if you don't already know who your representatives are, like that is like really the first step, right? So you might know who your council member is, or you might not. So know which ward you're located in, and know who your county district supervisor is, and those are your conduits. Those are the people that are gonna want to know what you would support should another ballot proposition be proposed.
Just as a point of recommendation, so mind you, the county board supervisor for the folks that have a direct vote relative to RTA and what we see show up on our ballot, if you are in interest of Move Tucson and city-specific actions, is where you would go to your council member.
Name and affiliation.
Great. Hi, I'm Angel Guzman. I am a part of the leadership with Radical Adventure Writers. You kind of took my steam with the first part of my question, but my second part of my question is, let's say this does pass. How do normal people action into this? Which it could be probably some of the same of your answer, but how do we get involved to make sure that what RTA looks like for us is something that we can hopefully try and cram into something that could benefit the city of Tucson?
Good question.
I have some thoughts too.
So my initial thought is, I think the answer is largely the same, no matter what happens on March 10th. I think that partly because we can acknowledge that this plan doesn't do enough for Tucson. If it passes, we still need to be out there advocating for more. I think it's a harder task because voters may not want to approve something else in the near future. But I think that we owe it to ourselves, we owe it to our community to try to push for that. And so I think that what Logan mentioned, stay engaged no matter what happens on March 10th. It's gonna be critical both ways.
And I would just say too that there are, we didn't talk about sort of the committees. You know, one of the ones that you mentioned earlier was the First Avenue Commission, and like that's overseeing a specific project, right? So once RTA passes, it's not like our work is done at all. In fact, you know, we are going to be mobilizing around either specific projects or specific initiatives that really are about, continuing to address the safety crisis on our roads.
And I do think one thing that's important is that, like, our city, like Vanessa was saying, we are essentially hedged into this situation that we're in. It's just the place that we are. With whatever happens, our engineers within our city and the people that are working in the city are doing the best that they can within the parameters they've been given. But I do think one of the other examples to look at is Broadway. Broadway was supposed to demolish about 200 buildings, and Preserve Tucson was essentially founded to educate the city that the value of the buildings is high. And so it took the city and 3 years of litigation to get that reduced, the scope reduced. And in the end, we were able to get, and then talking with Rocco's Pizza, he was saying, we made sure the median was big enough that if we ever put light rail down this route, we can have a station in the middle. And so when any one of these projects come forward, all of us have to come forward and be thinking, like, how do we make this so that even after 20 years, we can retrofit this into something somewhat human? And so I think it is like, watch the projects, be aggressive, follow the community leaders who are posting about it or talking about it or telling us when to get engaged. Living Streets Alliance, we will try our best. It is overwhelming. I'm like a super user on these meetings. I'm at 22nd Street Bridge yelling at them that there's not a safe crossing. I'm on First Avenue. I just wait for those meetings and I show up and I try. And the city does respond and they do their best. Yeah.
Okay, so we have time for 2 more questions, and they're going to be right here, these 2 folks. Please go ahead, name and affiliation.
Okay. Hi, my name's Erica Wingfield, Tucsonan born and raised, second generation. My main question is just like, in this window leading up to the election, what can I say to my fellow citizens and constituents? Because right now, I hate to say it as someone who works in marketing, but like the marketing for yes to RTA is like really strong, because it's just a short little like, oh, let's fix the potholes. And everyone's like, oh, I can get on board with that. But like, it's harder to explain that, and also that pamphlet is enormous, and I know most people are not going to read that. So what are some like quick talking points I can cover with my constituents, or not constituents, fellow citizens?
Great.
Thank you.
Okay, give us your quick talking points.
I think I might hand this to you, Vanessa, other than to say the potholes in the ads are very troubling. This is not a plan that is going to fix potholes on your street. State law says that routine maintenance, and then in parentheses it says, like fixing potholes, is not a legal use of RTA sales tax revenue. Every single piece of mail, I would guess, coming to your houses, on the billboards, there are reasons to support this plan. There's a conversation that we can have about this plan. Steve, you brought up some good points. The pothole thing is just, yeah, totally misleading. And I think that tells us something about the plan itself. If they can't advertise it based on the merits of the plan, I think we should all be very concerned. So as far as other talking points beyond the potholes, you want to?
Yeah, and I mean, I guess I would think about who your audience is, right? When I think about people who care about streets that are vibrant places, I think about safety, and that this plan is not a safety-first plan. It is not a transit-first plan. It will not, Tucson declared a climate emergency. We have Tucson Resilient Together, our climate action plan that has specific goals around reducing greenhouse gas emissions. This plan is not aligned with the climate resilient future. We're also, I think one of the other points that I really think is important is, as Tucsonans, we generate 65% of the sales tax. We are the only jurisdiction that has to pay to play. And that is millions of dollars that we couldn't be investing in infrastructure that poorly needs it, that really needs it.
Yeah, and My quick talking points are the city of Tucson has about half the income of the surrounding communities, and we provide the majority of the funds, and then we receive a minority of the funds. So we, as the poor city, are subsidizing wealthy suburbs. I think that's one of the talking points. The other one is the priorities of the city. We're not in a commuting crisis. We do not need to widen roads. We do not need to subsidize sprawl into our desert. We need to fix safety. And I think safety is one of the biggest priorities. And the other thing would be when you're reading that they're putting in bike lanes and sidewalks, when was the last time you walked down Grant or Broadway? Like these projects, the majority of the funding goes to widening to 5-7 lane roads with high speeds. So like safety, equity, and also like what kind of city do you want to live in? Yeah.
One 2-second addition, look at the track record from the last 20 years. We're one of the least safe cities in the whole country, top 5 for bicyclists, pedestrians, and drivers. We can't put all that on RTA, but there have been opportunity costs for investing as much as we have in RTA priorities and not taking care of the critical need.
I'll get your last question. For a resource, there's little cards on the chairs. There's 5 quick talking points, and we have copies of those. Grab some of those, and you can share those with your friends and acquaintances. They're super brief, and they're to the point. And we're going to conclude with this last question. Name and affiliation.
My name is Ryan. I'm unaffiliated. If I was to place a bet on Kalshi, what are the chances that this thing passes? The more serious question is, I just looked through the pamphlet this weekend. I saw who was supporting it and who was against it. What do you think the political climate is, and is this going to pass or not?
Great question. Thank you. Who'd like to take that one on?
Steve. I have no idea. There's a lot of money going into supporting Props 418 and 419. I think last we heard, almost $700,000?
I think that from what I was reading, this might be the most expensive election in Pima County history for fund dollars spent on advertisements.
And it's publicly available who is paying for the Yes campaign. It is largely the road building industry and developers. Some utilities thrown in. So I think that money can talk. Mailers in your mailbox about potholes can convince people to vote for something. So I think maybe as a transition to what we're going to talk about or what someone's going to talk about next, I think the only way to counter that is talking to people.
And I think one thing I will add, because I think, Ryan, you hit on something really important, is this moment now. And I think that's really important when we think about the political climate that we're in. I think people are tired of special interests telling us what we need to, how we should be investing in our community. And we're seeing that really clearly through this campaign, that this is being shaped and advocated by the same people that have shaped our city for the last several decades. And I think there's young people, people who are paying attention that, we're tired of that. And one of the things that we have going against us is that this is a special election in March, where we know the voter base and the voter turnout might look very different than it would in a November election.
And I'll just add 10-1 says it. I'm just kidding. So I'm not putting any money into this. But what I would say is I think that this is my grievance potentially, is that I feel like as a society we're losing the conversation of sustainability. We're losing the conversation of visionary thinking, and we're losing the conversation of responsibility. And what I'm seeing on the ground is a lot of people saying that they want something better, either from the very far right, they just don't want more taxes and they don't want something. On the very far left, they're saying there's a very large upswelling of grassroots organizations saying that we want something better. We want something considering like a sustainable future. So Personally, I'm at about a 50-50 right now, and I don't know what's going to happen, but I hope that we can work towards something that actually provides a sustainable, positive future.
All right, that was good. You guys are pretty politic, man. So we're going to close with this. So this is actually for Vanessa.
Okay.
Vanessa, tell us, what are we supposed to do next? You know, the question is, what can people do now?
Okay.
And what should they do after leaving this meeting tonight?
Okay. First of all, make a plan to vote. Because if you're like me, you have your ballot untouched that's sitting on my desk, and don't procrastinate. Put that ballot in the mail by March 1st or walk it over, and make sure that you vote and have a plan to do that. The second thing I would encourage us all to do is to take one thing you learned from tonight, and I love the question about what are the talking points, because you are our most powerful tool right now. Our most powerful resource is your voice and your network, because people listen to you, right? Whether that's you texting a friend, resharing a post on our website, from our social media, or talking to a neighbor. This is about community, and this is what we as LSA have always been about, is about understanding that we as a community are the ones that will create the change that we want to see. And the last thing I will encourage us all to do as we are thinking about the future, ever since LSA put out our position statement in November, we've had a trickle and a growing base coming to us saying, like, thank you. We want to stand behind what's next. We're not just prepared to say no, we're prepared to mobilize for a yes. And so if you have those cards on your chair, there's a QR code that you can scan to simply just sign this manifesto that clearly outlines that we are committed to investing in our community in a way that aligns with our values for a climate resilient future, for mobility choice, and for all of us to live in a place that thrives economically. So those are the three things: vote, talk to a friend, and join us in building the future that we deserve.
Excellent, thank you. Let's give these guys a hand. So before you all leave tonight, I just want to say a few thank yous, because an event like this doesn't just happen. I want to thank the LSA staff for their grunt work executing this. Prab, Madeline, Ellie. And then I also want to thank Matt from Car Free Tucson. He's handled the audio and the video. And then also, I want to thank the Historic 4th Avenue Coalition for letting us use this space. And then a special acknowledgement tonight, and something that I want you all to do on the way out. Living Streets Alliance has some interns from the Livermore Fellows who have been here tonight, and they did something very special. They did this little handout. It's a little zine, and it's kind of creative. Take one of these on the way out and look it over, and I think you'll get a chuckle. So thanks everybody for being here tonight. I really appreciate it.
Thank you all, and feel free to grab a yard sign on your way out.